Okay.
And we are live here with another episode of the Let's Debate podcast. Tonight is going to be a fun one. As you could probably tell from our setup here, we are going to talk about The Last Dance, the 10-part documentary series that details the 1990 Chicago Bulls and the run of the great Michael Jordan. If you don't know who I am, my name is Nick Delahanty. To my side here is my co-host Kyle. How's it going?
What's going on, Nick? And hello, everyone. Welcome back to Let's Debate podcast. We had a little bit of a shorter week this week. We had a schedule change from last week. So last Thursday's episode actually had to be moved to just this past Sunday. This is our second show of the week. Um, if you're a baseball fan and you're having interest in listening to us talk about baseball, you should head over to our website on the screen right now at anchor.fm/Let's Debate. Just this past Sunday's episode, we talked about basically the state of baseball. Are the players and the owners going to come to an agreement to get the 2020 season underway with this whole COVID-19 mess going on? So make sure to check that out. If you're also still looking at the screen right now, you can head over to our social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Give it a like, follow, share, whatever floats your boat. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's basically what I had to say to start things off. I'm going to send it over to Nick right now if he has anything to add. If not, let's get the show on the road.
Yeah, you covered most of it. A couple of things I want to bring up. Don't forget, our store is active and loaded. If you go to the store and you put in Let's Debate, you'll get a 10% off coupon tonight. Also, follow the social media. Over the next week, we have some big announcements to make in regards to a new website that we have created. It looks fantastic. It was actually published today. We're going to put out an official release about that over the next couple of days. Alpha Designs did a great job. My good friend Connor worked amazing work on the site. I think it's going to be a lot more easy for you guys to access not only this show, but everything that Delahanty Media has to offer. Uh, I think that's all we have to cover on that, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later on. Remember to continue to comment during the show. We want to hear your thoughts about the topic. There's a lot to digest in this 10-part, 10-hour series, so there's a lot that we're going to cover, a lot that we're not going to get to, but we're going to try our best. And as we start the conversation on this, I think it's only right to start with the guy, the kind of mastermind behind it all, and that's Michael Jordan. You know, there's always that debate about who's the greatest of all time. And I think that for the sake of what we're talking about right now, it's important for everybody to kind of put that aside. Not to say that this hasn't influenced it by any means, but looking at this from the perspective of the 90s, there's a lot that goes into this. And Jordan was that LeBron James figure of today. You're sitting there, you're listening, and you're watching things, and Jordan was that beloved figure. And what the Chicago Bulls went through in the 90s, it just amazed me, some of the things they went through. And it was not just on the court, but it was also off the court. And before we get into any specific players or stories or whatnot, what was your overall thoughts on the Last Dance documentary series?
I'm not gonna lie, it was a great documentary. I was actually talking to one of my friends the other day, and I was explaining to him that Jordan, Pippen, and we'll even throw in Rodman. Or we'll talk about the Bulls too. I just felt like they weren't even basketball players; they're almost like rock stars, right? Like it almost seemed like a reality TV show. Everything that was going on between the decisions that Dennis Rodman made, going on to like WCW, how Jordan was handing out tickets in like his own little room with security guards. Like it just didn't seem like that typical setup that you would have in the NBA today. So overall, though, I mean, it was a great watch. I looked forward to it. I think a majority of the world, because there's nothing else to watch, but especially basketball fans loved watching that every Sunday for 2 hours. And I'm not going to lie, like I'm going to miss it, because I do love basketball. I am a fan of Michael Jordan. It was just a great watch. What did you think about it?
Listen, I first of all, you know my love for Jordan, coming back from the Carolina days. So,
Yeah.
he's a guy that always has uh, been a great in my mind. But it was just so refreshing to watch this whole series take place and go through the history of it because let's remember, both of us were very young at the time. We missed the first half of the Bulls' run. I was very young. You were even younger than I was for the second half of it. So what live remember
Hmm.
is very minimal at that. But to see what they dealt with, like you said, it was
Right.
just unbelievable. And they were essentially rock stars. And Jordan says in the one part, I don't remember which show it was. He basically comes out and says, these guys are coming in. They had nothing to do with the first three-peat. They come into training camp and they're like, yeah, we're part of the Chicago Bulls. Like it was a dynamic that was so out there and crazy and just all the pieces that went into it were just absolutely mind-boggling. And it started with Jordan. Like some of the things that him and Jackson and even throw Pippen in there had to deal with during this was absolutely crazy.
Yeah, and I think not even so much. I think just the I guess the producers and let's say like the directors of the actual documentary. I really love the way they went about it because they would show scenes of 1998 and then they would kind of do a flashback to another point. And I thought that was really cool because it was leading up to that finale. It was leading up to the game 6 in 1998 finals versus the Jazz. And they kind of just kept going back and forth. And you really had to pay attention because if you didn't see the date flash on the screen, you would have no idea what they were talking about. Obviously, we're basketball fans, so we know that in 97 and 98 they versed the Jazz. But if you're someone just watching and you're not as knowledgeable about the actual product or the history of Jordan and this Bulls team, you have no idea if they're talking about 1991, 1992. And I like how they started right from scratch and they involved a lot of the guys that were part of that process, even guys like Steve Kerr, who was only there for kind of like the later half of that. Um, but we'll get into each guy pretty soon, like individually.
That's a great point too. In regards to not only Jordan, but they focus a lot on the different guys that did play a role. Because let's face it, basketball is a sport where you're not. Yeah, one player can make a difference, but you need a team to be able to win. We've seen that, and in that situation,
Oh yeah,
Jordan had a team around him. Those guys were they. Yeah, a lot of people don't give them the credit they deserve, but some of those guys were very quality NBA players. So we got a little background on them. I did like you said about how they did jump around a little bit. They went into different backstories and they gave you a little bit of a feel for the player personally before their time on the court. And that was one of the things that I truly enjoyed because, yeah, I liked hearing about the stories on the court, but we got a little more insight on each individual that kind of not changed my perspective on them, but gave me more insight and more respect for them, not only as a basketball player, but as a human being as well, because you hear some backstories and you say, wow, you know what, they dealt with a lot. There was a lot of things that were going on, and the way they handled things had to change your respect level for some of these guys.
yeah, and I think you always hear so much about Jordan. You hear so much about like the Bulls in the '90s, but I think this documentary really kind of opened the door and showed us some things that some of us probably didn't expect or didn't know. I know personally for me, some of the things that Jordan said or did, I didn't know he did that. I didn't know he reacted that way to certain things. I didn't know Scottie Pippen was one of the like what he made no money. He made no money. So that blows my mind. Some of the things Dennis Rodman did, I had no idea. But it also kind of gave me a different perspective on them and like whether I like them a little bit more or kind of dislike them a little bit more. Um, but yeah, I'm excited to kind of jump into these guys individually too because, like I said, documentary was amazing.
And what we'll do throughout the show is I'll ask if your opinion on them changed, whether you like them more, dislike them, had a respect level change, and we'll kind of go that way. But let's start with Jordan. I think that's the best place
Okay.
to start, and we'll kind of trickle down from there. Jordan's arguably the greatest player of all time. A lot of people say he is. A lot of people say he's in their top five. Whatever it may be, however you may feel about it, uh, he's one of the greatest to ever play. And we never saw a side of Jordan like we did during this documentary. And like you said, some of the things that he did, it was unbelievable to just think about because if that happened today, it would be a whole different ballgame, in my opinion, the way that he handled himself on the court. But the way he handled himself And as he says a million times throughout the documentary, he was trying to win. And from my sense of it, he was trying to get the
Mhm.
guys around him to buy in so they had that same level of desire to want to win. He wanted to win, but he knew he couldn't do it alone.
Right. And that's like a big point of the documentary, because you think to yourself, some of the things that he did, I know he says, and it's supposed to be understood that he did these things because he wanted to win so bad. The thing is, do you need to go to the extent that you did to actually win? You know, like some of the things he did, I felt like, or some of the things he said kind of crossed the line sometimes. And I know some of the things that he said and did to certain teammates. Now they look back on it and they're like, "Oh, it's fine. You know, we won, and it's like justified." Um, and I'll jump into a few of them right now. I think he mentioned a lot, and look, he could be serious, he could be joking. He mentioned a lot about him being God, right? Black Jesus and things like that. So who was he? He was trash talking with.
It was Reggie
It might have been
Miller.
Reggie Miller, and like the finale, and he mentioned never like don't trash talk Black Jesus, and then he mentioned another time inside the um in the locker room when their tickets were like sold out for the season. I think it was either B.J. Armstrong or Burrell came into the locker room and he wanted tickets, and uh, he asked Jordan if he could have them. Jordan says, "Where do you want them?" He said, "I'll take the closest seats to God." And then Jordan hands him the tickets. And then Jordan said, "What did you just say?" And he goes, "I'll take the closest seats to God." And he goes, "God just handed you the tickets." Like, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of crossing the line. Uh, you also have how he punched Steve Kerr in the face during practice. But I think it made for a good documentary. I mean, I got a chuckle out of those things that he said. I mean, I don't agree with him completely, but it was a good watch.
Now, let me ask you a rebuttal question on that. Okay, so given what we know from the documentary and given the stories that we heard throughout it, do you think that Jordan had to be that way to keep those guys in line? Because let's face it, if this happened, the closest thing that I could relate the 90s Bulls to was the 77 78 Yankees, where they were labeled the Bronx Zoo, where it was total chaos and it just seemed like
Mhm.
everything was going out of control, but they were really good. Like Rodman going off the Richter multiple times. Uh, just things like that. Pippen holding out, not being there. Do you think that the way that the team was going made Jordan kind of change his ways and be that kind of guy who is tough and sometimes over the top with those guys?
I mean, I'm kind of 50-50 on that. I feel like there might have been certain situations where he needed to be like that. But I think if you look back at just the way he reacted with Steve Kerr, I don't think Steve Kerr was really doing anything at the time to be like punched in the face. You know what I'm saying? Like that one stands out to me because Steve Kerr was just practicing, and he was being the type of guy that he was. And I know that what came out of it was, well, Kerr stood up to Jordan, so then he earned Jordan's respect. And I get that part of it. I just think that there were certain things Jordan did that are justified and made him a better teammate and made his team better and him as a leader especially. But there's certain things like there where I just feel like he crossed the line a little bit.
Yeah, and that's justified. You could say that there's a lot that he did, like punching Kerr. Was that really called for? I don't know. I don't know the situation. I wasn't there. But again, from what you see, from watching the documentary, you're like, man, why do you do that? That's kind of a little bit over the top. Just like his bullying of Scott Burrell over that poor guy. Uh, you see this. I'll never forget it. The image of him in the locker room, and he's like, "If I ever see you again, I'm gonna kick your behind." And he's just sitting there, and he's serious about it. So you don't know, you don't see him joking
Yeah.
about this. Um, but if he played in today's era, and this is what I kind of want to transition into, and he did half the stuff he did, there would be people calling him a bully. There would be a whole different ball game. Back then, he was a figure where he was like God. He could do whatever he wanted. And the media was on him, but I feel like in today's social media, And the way the world is, he would never be able to get away with half the stuff he did back then.
Yeah, there's no way. And I think a good comparison to that, and you mentioned him earlier in the show, is LeBron James. LeBron James being in the spotlight that Michael Jordan once was, he would not be able to get away with that right now. And I think that goes to show a lot about LeBron James, because when this was all going on, we really didn't know about that. Social media was non-existent. We didn't find out. We weren't, I guess you should say the media wasn't really so in depth in people's lives. They followed them around and everything, but the public didn't know so much about that until maybe at a later time, or it wasn't like right in the moment. If LeBron James punched his teammate in the face right now, we'd know about it in 3 minutes, and it would blow up and his reputation would be ruined. So there were a lot of things that Michael Jordan did, and I said this before, we didn't know about, but now we know. And he did say when the documentary was coming out that people were going to hate him after this because of some of the things he did and some of the way he went about certain things. But for people to do that in today's day and age, they wouldn't get away with that. And that also kind of brings up the conversation, like, how would Michael Jordan, I know, on the court, he would succeed today, but how would he get around that? Like, did he need to do that to succeed? Because if so, if he needed to do that to get his team going and to get himself going, you're not able to do that today. And I know he's a great player and he could still win, and I'm sure he still would have put up the stats that he did, but you can't do that. So would he have succeeded to that extent?
I think he still would.
I doubt that's the case.
I still think he would succeed.
Yeah.
I think that his talent level would be there. But some of the things that occurred would have never flew. Like him going to Atlantic City to gamble with his father, he would have got ripped. He got ripped back then. He would have got ripped even more so now.
Yeah.
But when I tie the whole Jordan debacle to, and Kobe Bryant, they had a really beautiful section about Kobe. And Kobe says, I can't stand when people ask me, you'd beat MJ in one-on-one, or you'd beat so-and-so in one-on-one. And he was like, no, hold up. What you got from him is a little bit of an element I'm bringing to the table. And what I'm bringing is hopefully influencing somebody else. And I feel like what Jordan went through and the way Jordan kind of carried himself, I think that not only did he influence Kobe, but I think that it helped influence lower generations. And I think that's why LeBron is so good in regards to how he is off the court. And I commend him a lot in regards to everything he does. He's one of the best athletes out there in terms of being off the court, helpful in the world and being a role model. And I think that if you watch this documentary, if those guys were watching and took notice of what Jordan was doing and how he was getting handled in the media, maybe they did learn a thing or two from him in that regard. And his influence might not have just been on the court, but it may have been off as well, which benefited them both because, let's be real, when Kobe passed, when he tragically passed, he was a beloved figure. He was the girl dad. He was the role model dad. And LeBron's the role model type of parent, the role model type of citizen right now.
Right. So are you saying that, like, the good things that he did are you could kind of say, well, you're saying like LeBron and Kobe might have followed in his footsteps in regards to the good things that he did.
saying that they might have learned from both. Because let's remember, Kobe was in the league toward the end of Jordan's career. So seeing how Jordan handled things and being around him, and let's remember, he said he was like a big brother to him. Maybe Jordan passed on some knowledge from what he understood. We don't know those inside conversations. And what I took from it was, maybe, just maybe there was a little bit more to it that influenced Kobe. And he might have passed on from generation to generation. Because let's remember, the same kind of relationship Jordan had with Kobe, it seemed like Kobe had that with LeBron.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think whatever they saw, whether good or bad, Kobe and LeBron found their own ways to be leaders and teammates, and they're putting that all together. I'm sure there's things that they took from Michael Jordan. There's probably things that Michael Jordan passed on to Kobe and Kobe passed on to LeBron. It's just how they are. They all respect each other in that sense. Yes, they're all competitors and they all are competing, to be the greatest. You had Kobe to me, Kobe Bryant is if you're going to talk about a basketball player, he's most similar to Michael Jordan. They're just so similar. I know we talk Michael Jordan and LeBron James being the greatest of all time, but Michael Jordan and LeBron James are not even comparable when it comes to their style of play. It's Kobe Bryant. So Kobe learned from Jordan, and then when Jordan retired, it became the conversation: is it Kobe or LeBron? And Kobe, being the guy that he is, taught LeBron a lot. So I mean, I agree with what you're saying there.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful dynamic if you think about it. If you sit back and just think, Jordan could have been a jerk to Kobe when Kobe asked him about his jump shot. He could have been that guy who said, I don't feel like really helping you, kid. Like, figure it out on your own. And Jordan was one of those guys that he wasn't going to give you an edge to beat him, but he wanted to win so bad. But to see how he influenced Kobe and just a simple, if you need anything, call me. How that influenced Kobe. And I'm sure that grew on him. Because let's remember, a lot of the players who are playing in the NBA now model their game after Jordan or Kobe, or you could go on and on. You're influenced by what you grow up watching. Same with us. When we were growing up, we were big baseball fans. You idolized Derek Jeter. That was what you knew. And so that's a kind of thing that basketball generations do bring on. Kobe and LeBron have added their own style. But I feel like there's an ingredient of Jordan in both of their games that I think that they would both agree with, that they do take a wrinkle from that, whether it's on the court, off the court, things that they notice, like or dislike. Everybody's going to be different, but I think that there's still some type of ingredient in their overall style of play.
Yeah, and I think that kind of relates a little bit to the passing of Kobe Bryant earlier this year, because Michael Jordan had the impact that he had on players, right? Kobe Bryant had an impact just like that, and we were able to see that firsthand just a few months back. All the outreach that happened regarding the death of Kobe Bryant, whether it's on the court or off the court, we realized that, yeah, these guys are great basketball players, but they're even bigger role models to people. And sometimes it takes a documentary to show that. Sometimes it takes a tragic death to show that. It's going to be interesting to see where that leads in a few years to when LeBron retires, because I think out of all of them, LeBron held himself. How should I say this? I mean, I just feel like he's been like the perfect role model out of everything, because we're taking a look now what Michael Jordan did, and there were certain things you look at and you're like, wouldn't have gotten away with that, now 22 years later. Kobe Bryant, we know some of the things that he did. There's really not much you can say about LeBron, but I mean, I'm not going to talk about LeBron right now, but I know what you're trying to say with it, and I think it carries on, and that's all. That basically comes with respect. You earn that respect, and when you pass that on to certain people you feel are deserving to learn that information. Michael Jordan had a ton of respect for Kobe Bryant. He saw a lot of himself in him, and that's why he passed on certain information the way that he did, and how to shoot the ball certain ways and how to lead his team in certain ways. And that's why Kobe Bryant's career is so similar to Michael Jordan's. I mean, it's very, very similar.
Oh, absolutely. And, I'm glad we're touching on LeBron, because I think that as we're talking about Kobe, it's an important dialogue to have. Unlike Kobe didn't get to have that long-term impact like Jordan does, or Magic Johnson does, or guys that you've seen around for a long time. Kobe was that guy who was supposed to be an ambassador for the league. I hope, and we can't predict the future. We don't know what's going to happen. But I hope that LeBron James is around for a very long time, because I think that he has so much to offer, not only the game of basketball, but the world, that I hope that impact is felt, because I do feel like we lost out, and the sport of basketball and the world lost out on a great individual in Kobe. And seeing how LeBron is, and you said it, he's a perfect citizen and a perfect model for kids of all ages. So I hope that he does get that chance to make that influence. As we're kind of jumping off of Jordan a little bit, I think it's only right to go from Batman to Robin, and that's Scottie Pippen. And
Oh, yeah.
From what we were talking about earlier, between us, Pippen was one of the most underrated and underpaid players, I would say, in NBA history. When you watch the documentary, we saw it firsthand how Pippen had his holdout. And even though reports say that Pippen wasn't happy with the way he was portrayed, I feel like Jordan portrayed this in a way that was fitting to the story because that's what impacted the story. That was a huge part of the Bulls' run.
Yeah, and I actually mentioned in our episode about who is the GOAT in basketball, Michael Jordan, LeBron James. I mentioned a lot in there how important Scottie Pippen was to Michael Jordan's career, and I'm happy that. And I knew it would happen. Obviously, like how do you not give Scottie Pippen credit? But right from the start, once they started introducing Scottie Pippen, Michael Jordan said, "There is no Michael Jordan without Scottie Pippen." And you're right, he is one of the most underrated, and I didn't know this until the documentary, underpaid players of all time. And they kind of portrayed him in a sense that he was like this bad teammate. Like at certain points, he was a bad teammate because maybe he wasn't getting the ball with the final shot in the game, or he was holding out because he waited on surgery and he wanted a new contract, and he was kind of being petty in that sense. But it's like completely justified as to why he did those things. Like I never looked at him and was like bad teammate, bad guy. I don't agree with what he's doing. This is a guy who was literally the Robin to Batman, as in Michael Jordan. There is no Michael Jordan without Scottie Pippen. There's no three-peat twice. There's no 6 titles. He should have been paid. And, I mean, luckily, he is the type of guy that he is, where he still got on the court. He still put in the time on that bad contract. But that's also on their GM, who we're going to get into it a little bit, too, for even signing him to that. Because, like, I get it. It's good business-wise for you. But Jerry Krause knew the entire time that was a terrible contract. And I don't know. I mean, just it's mind-boggling that he was even signed to that. I was in shock. That was probably the part I was most shocked in. Forget punching someone in the face. Forget the God comments. It was the fact that Scottie Pippen was signed to such a bad contract because everyone knows who Scottie Pippen is, and the fact that he was making no money during that run, and we're talking about this group of guys 22 years later. It's crazy.
I was amazed by it too. I didn't know the actual numbers. I knew he was grossly underpaid, and that was why the Bulls ended up trading him. But I always thought that it was part of the rebuild because Krause didn't want to keep that team together, and he saw what Pippen was able to do without Jordan. And I felt like that was a reason why he wanted to get rid of him because there was a chance of winning, and it didn't seem like Krause wanted to win with the old regime. Some of the things that I loved about Pippen throughout, first of all, his backstory. I loved hearing a little bit more about him. I understand the holdout. I really do. He was grossly underpaid and coming off surgery. I think I would have held out too. And again, they portrayed him as a bad teammate when Kukoc takes the final shot of the game and he's sitting on the bench. But the thing that I loved about Pippen was that he was always there for Jordan, regardless of what it was. And it was portrayed that like we keep saying, Batman and Robin. Like if Jordan got into a fight, Pippen was right there. If there was something going wrong, Pippen had his back. They were always sitting next to each other on the bench talking, whatnot. And my favorite story was when they go into the Olympics together and they faced Kukoc for the first time. And they hated Jerry Krause. And they wanted to shut him down. And that was the one thing that the two of them both said. They were like, that was our goal. We're like, nobody else guard him. We're taking him and we're going to take care of him. And I just feel like as a dynamic duo and as a unit, they gelled so much. And that was a major reason why they were able to be so successful over that run, was because when your top two guys are so in sync like that, that's hard to beat.
Yeah, and I think what was big was Pippen knew where he stood. He never got jealous that Michael Jordan was going to get the spotlight. He knew Michael Jordan was the guy, but he figured, hey, you know what? I'm up there. He ends up being one of the top 50 greatest players of all time now. He knew he needed to be the Robin to Batman. And you mentioned his backstory, which I love too, because I believe it was he had 2 people in his family, in his household, that were in wheelchairs. That's not easy for a young kid coming up and going to college and trying to make the NBA. And the fact that he came out of such a small school and got drafted to the NBA, the fact that even though he was a first-round pick, he wasn't being looked at to be Scottie Pippen. Like, I don't think anyone expected him to be Scottie Pippen. And then he made a few funny comments in the Olympics. Like I think it was the post-game interview when they were talking about covering Kukoc. Like they mentioned, I don't remember exactly what it was, but they kind of took a jab at him and said, well, if he can't score in this game, then, what's he going to average when he comes to the pros? And it's funny to actually see them talk about that because they were bullying him that game. They were trash talking him, and then they ended up winning like 3 championships with the guy. So it's funny to look back at those interviews, and it must have been funny for them to watch that too.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like imagine the guys that they ridiculed because Jerry Krause liked those guys. He mentions I don't remember the guy's name. Covered him in a game. He thought he was a good defensive player. And Jordan flat out says, I wanted to prove him wrong. And we'll get into Krause in a little bit, but and you made a good point as in regards to Pippen knew his role. And I think that a lot of the guys on the Bulls team knew their role. And one of the guys that we're going to get into now, off of Pippen, who knew his role but didn't go at it very well, was Dennis Rodman. Man, was that dude wild. I knew how nuts he was sitting there, but when you take it into consideration, like he just picked up and went to Vegas. Imagine if he would have did that today, like in today's media and today's world. First of all, the commissioner would have jumped in. They would have been drug testing him. They would have been fining him. But the Bulls just handled it. And I think that had to go into play with Jordan knew how valuable he was to their success, and they did anything in their power to keep him happy.
Yeah, Rodman's the guy I wanted to talk about because I'm not going to lie, like, the guy is crazy, but I think the best way to describe him would just be I feel like he was completely misunderstood. Like, you could tell, listen, yes, he didn't dress the way people typically dress, okay? You don't typically show up to practice for the NBA Finals in PJs. You don't take a flight to Vegas. You don't win a game, or I don't even know if they won the game or lost the game in the finals, and then instead of flying back home with the team to go to practice the next day, he flies and he's on WCW Monday Night Nitro, I believe it was. I mean, you don't see that often, but I feel like he was misunderstood because at the same time they showed as much as he did those crazy things, which are completely unacceptable when you're a professional athlete, you're on a team, you're in the NBA Finals, but he still showed up and did his job. It would be a lot different if he showed up and didn't play well and he wasn't focused and things like that. And then as crazy as he seemed, dyeing his hair, like I said, people look at him and judge a book by its cover. This guy's nuts. He's not a good guy. They showed him signing autographs for kids, standing there for a long time, making sure that he gave back to the fans. So the reason I wanted to talk about him so much is because I gained a lot of respect for him. Like, I swear to God, I'm looking at him right now as one of my favorite players of all time. I love, like, everything about him. Like, he was wacky, but he got the job done. He's one of the greatest defenders and rebounders in NBA history. He played mind games with people. He was a physical player. He was a huge part of that team. 5-time NBA champion. I'm telling you, I love Dennis Rodman, and I wish they showed more of him. I wish they showed more of him.
I would love to have a documentary just on him. That would be prime time gold.
They should.
But before I get into talking about Rodman, being that now he's one of your favorite players, you think we could dye your hair the same color as his?
I don't think that's going to be a good look for me, at least. If I was playing basketball,
listen,
maybe.
If your mom is watching, I'm just going to apologize now because this is going to happen. You're going to have the green Dennis Rodman hair, even if we have to cut it off afterward, just for a photo op, just to put you next to Dennis Rodman because you gain so much respect for him. The thing that I like,
I think the only way that's happened is if we make a bet and I lose that bet pretty badly.
It's okay. I'll talk you into it.
That'll be the only way.
But the thing I think gained my respect for him was how, like you said, he just showed up and played. Like, yeah, he was misunderstood. And I believe that the Bulls understood how he was. They understood he was complex. They understood that he didn't tick the right way. They understood that he wasn't your normal human being. But at the end of the day, he came and he showed up to play. Like, after the WWE event, he comes out and he has one of his best games. Like, the dude just showed up and played, and I think he thrived knowing that Jordan needed him. I think that was such a saving grace for the Bulls. If he was on a bad team, and after he left the Bulls, he got forced into retirement, and he couldn't find a real home. He had a purpose with that team. He had a mindset going in, like, they need me. Like, yeah, practice wasn't his thing, leaving for a couple of days when they have off days, avoiding practice to go to Vegas. Yeah, that was okay to him. That was how he rolled. But at the end of the day, he balled out. He gave it his all. He gave 150%, and the way he rebounded was definitely a huge boost for those teams that he was on.
Yeah, and I've actually, because I feel like I've been on social media like everyone, most of the time during the day, and you see like certain things that people say, and there's actually people out there saying that Dennis Rodman was overrated and things like that. But then I also saw something that I'm about to mention right now that changes like it should change their opinion on it, and that's that Dennis Rodman was so good that Michael Jordan went looking for him around Las Vegas to make sure that he was at practice or the game like the following day, because he took that like 2-day little vacation to get away. And that's pretty much load management right now, right? He's the best to ever do it when it comes to load management. He did it the right way. But and with that being said, I just think that what blows my mind too, which I didn't know about until a few days ago, his number is actually not retired by the Bulls, which is crazy to me because he was a major part of that team. And like Pippen, he knew his role. He wasn't the scorer. Look, get the rebounds, play good defense, get in people's heads, be aggressive, be physical, and he did that great. And you know what? I know Michael Jordan and Pippen won 3 championships without him, but I'm not sure if they win those championships, those last 3, without Dennis Rodman, because he played a major part in that, especially going against teams like the Supersonics and the Jazz, who have big men like Shawn Kemp and Karl Malone. You need a guy like Dennis Rodman, and he played great in those games. You saw the way he was diving on the floor with Karl Malone. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was getting up, falling in his way purposely. That's all a mind game, That's huge, and teams need that. And I'm not a big fan of this guy, and I'm not trying to compare Dennis Rodman to him because I think this is Dennis Rodman and this is Draymond Green. But Draymond Green's also that type of player. And so was Ron Artest. Like, you need sometimes you need that player who's a good defensive player and gets in your head. And a lot of championship teams have had that. So that says a lot in itself about Dennis Rodman.
It is surprising that his number's not retired because he had such a big role. Honestly, you could make the case that a lot of those guys should have their numbers retired. The long-term time there might not be, but they should at least have their names and numbers up there. Even if you don't take the number out of rotation, they should be up there because that's a big part of Bulls history. And Rodman, he was unbelievable. Like, just the things that he did, like you said, the mind games that he played. He didn't back away from Karl Malone. Malone was arguably the best player in the league other than Jordan at the time that they were in the finals back-to-back years. That's how good Karl Malone was at that time. He wasn't afraid to take that challenge on, and Malone had a good series, but again, you're not slowing down a train like that. If you can beat him, that's, you got to do your best to kind of slow him down, and Rodman did his best. But he's diving into the stands, he's falling in front of him, he's slapping him. Like, some of the things are just crazy, and Rodman was a big part of this Bulls run and shouldn't be unrecognized. And I don't agree with the fans that don't appreciate what he did, because after the documentary especially, I have a newfound respect for Dennis Rodman, even more so than I did before. Another guy that I have a huge amount of respect for now is Steve Kerr. And let me tell you a little bit about Steve Kerr before what I knew beforehand. I knew that he was like a sharpshooter. I knew that he played a role on the Bulls. I knew that he's now the coach of the Warriors and that he led them into what people call a dynasty, but I don't call it a dynasty yet or at all. But hearing Steve Kerr's backstory with his father, to me, other than Jordan's father's situation, was the most heartfelt story throughout this whole documentary.
Yeah. And if you notice, there's kind of like a trend going on here. They all kind of dealt with their own situations. Jordan obviously dealt with the loss of his father. Dennis Rodman dealt with his family, the disabled people in his family, and having to grow up around that and having to be a huge help in his home while he's still chasing, his dream and his career. Dennis Rodman dealing with the things that he dealt with, that he put himself into. But then Steve Kerr, too. I mean, look, he had his hard times and he had his good times too. All right, we'll give him that. But Steve Kerr dealt with a lot growing up too. Obviously the tragic loss of his father, and they showed how he passed away. But I think another thing that I really respected about Steve Kerr too was, once again, he wasn't looked at as like this big time player coming into the pros. He had to earn his stripes in the league, and he did a really good job of that. And once again, and I think this is what made this team so great. They all knew their role, and like that's the main thing I could say about Steve Kerr. It's funny you mentioned or I actually mentioned it before about knowing their role, but Steve Kerr knew his role. Come in, you knock down the big shot when you need to because he was a sharpshooter. Did he get a ton of minutes? Did he get as many minutes as maybe Ron Harper did at the starting point guard? No, but he knew when to come in and hit the shot. And that was great that they showed that one part where Jordan's talking to him on the bench and was like, if I get you the ball, you need to knock down this shot. Steve Kerr was like, let's do it. And there was two parts in there that when Jordan punched him in the face, it's funny to say, but Jordan punched him in the face, basically like earned his respect, and he earned Jordan's respect. But then even on the bench, calling Kerr out saying you need to hit the shot, and Kerr coming in clutch in the NBA Finals to do that. I mean, that's why Steve Kerr is actually featured in this documentary right now. It's because his upbringing. It's because the clutch shots that he hits, the role that he played on this team, and obviously everything that he's done since then. Fun fact about Steve Kerr, he actually won 4 championships in a row because he won 3 there, and he went to the Spurs the next year and won a championship. So the guy's a winner, and he's a winner as a coach. So
yeah, and that scene on the bench is one of the best moments in the whole documentary. You see Jordan trying to calmly say, because he knows the camera's on, trying not to give anything away, telling him, you got to be ready to hit the shot. And there's Kerr yelling on the top of his lungs, I'm ready to go, let's go. It's hilarious to me. And like you mentioned, he's a winner. He learned how to win in Chicago, and then he goes to San Antonio, wins another ring. And as a coach, now you understand why he's so good with his players. Look at what he saw in Chicago. Look at what he went through with those teams and through his career. Like, you could translate that. And there's one clip that keeps going around on Twitter where he's talking to Kevin Durant, and he's giving him a Jordan kind of story that relates to what he's trying to tell him, and it just relates it. So he's using his past experience and his knowledge to help the players of today's generation. And it's not surprising that he's such a good coach, especially after seeing the dedication he put in. Like, he had to earn his role. He clearly says it. I want to be John Paxson. Like, he's the John Paxson replacement. He came in, he went under his wing, and he just took the role and ran with it.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to knowing his role. He wasn't a selfish player either. He understood that you're not going to be a superstar on this team, but if you do your job and you do it correctly, you're going to be a champion. And that, on top of his basketball IQ and his work ethic, is what is leading him to be one of the best coaches. I know he has a loaded team and everything, but they weren't champions before he got there. So he's a huge piece to that puzzle and a reason why they were champions. And he used he was a sharpshooter. He's coaching guys who are sharpshooters, but he's also coaching guys. If you look at that Warriors team, they all play their role. That team, they have their core guys. It was Curry, Thompson, Draymond, Durant added to the mix, but Iguodala, Sean Livingston. There were certain guys over the years that came in and played their role, and it's almost like deja vu for him because they're playing the role that he played, and what comes of that, the culmination is a championship.
Absolutely. And another thing to note is when he went to the Warriors, they were good, but they couldn't get over that hump. They couldn't get to that point where everybody thought they could get. He was the guy that brought them there. So the amount of role and credit he deserves for those championship runs is astronomical. Now, as we're talking about championship level coaches here, it's important to bring in the guy who was the mastermind behind it all, and that's Phil Jackson. And Jackson really took this team by storm and did a nice job with this group, especially given what he was dealing with. You're dealing with the greatest player in the world at the time. You have a role player who in Pippen, who is arguably the second best player in the league, everything he's dealing with. You have Rodman, and then you have your group of guys that have to learn their role. And I think that after the documentary, a lot of people are going to give Phil Jackson more credit because let's be honest, a lot of the younger generation knows Phil Jackson as the guy who ran the Knicks and didn't help the Knicks win. But what me and you can remember is that not only was he utterly successful in Chicago, but then he goes on to LA and adds a couple more championships to his fingers.
Yeah, I held off on mentioning Phil Jackson earlier when we were talking about Dennis Rodman because Phil Jackson deserves a lot of credit for the whole Dennis Rodman coming into Chicago and working out because Phil Jackson knew what got these guys going. He knew Dennis Rodman was the type of player who needed to get away sometimes and do his thing to refocus and play the way that he did. Phil Jackson also is a huge part of Michael Jordan's career, not because he was just the coach of championship teams, but he's actually the guy who got that team going. Like, we know Michael Jordan was the main guy on the team. He's the best player in the world. But I believe Michael Jordan made the comment in the documentary about he wasn't really too fond of Phil Jackson coming on board at first because he was going to take the ball away from him a little bit. I believe he was talking about Phil Jackson, unless he was talking about
Jackson with the triangle. Because he was implementing the triangle offense. Right. He didn't agree with it at first because, like you said, he was going to get the ball taken away.
Yeah, but that ended up, even though Michael Jordan still took the most shots on the team and scored the most points and basically did everything for them, that's still like Phil Jackson coming in took the Bulls over the hump. You know, like they were contending and making the playoffs with other coaches that he had. Like I believe it was Collins. But Jackson took them over the hump. And the same thing, like you mentioned before, there are certain things that we all looked at him, and I think some people tried to take some credit away from Phil Jackson over the years because he coached Pippen, Rodman, Jordan in the 90s, and then he coached Kobe and Shaq in the 2000s, and it's like he's always had these great players, some of the greatest players of all time. How hard is it to coach them? But now you see what he dealt with. First of all, something just popped in my head. You see what he dealt with in the 90s with the Bulls and those three guys and everything else going on. But then you also think about what he dealt with in LA with Kobe and Shaq and the drama that went on over there, and he still won 3 championships with those guys. And then years later wins another 2 with Kobe and Pau. So he's the greatest coach of all time. And the rings go to show it, and people can make the case that he had great players or not. Listen, this documentary went to show not everything is so perfect. Like, not everything seems as perfect as, or is not as perfect as it seems. You know, there's underlying things that go on. And I gained a lot. Like, he gained a lot of my respect after this documentary.
Absolutely, I agree with you on that. Just thinking about it, if you're just a fan of the NBA or you're a younger generation type of fan, you didn't live through this, you're looking at the numbers and you're saying, wow, they won 70 plus games this year, 60 plus this year. It had to be easy. It wasn't. I think that's a false perception that a lot of people have, was that it was easy. And in order to be successful, regardless of how much talent you have to have a good leader in charge to steer that talent in the right direction. And like you mentioned, there was a bunch of coaches before him that couldn't get the job done, but Jackson did it and seemed to do it. He made it look, I don't want to say effortless because there was definitely effort that went into it, but he made it look easy at times with this team, especially the way he handled Rodman. He understood the personalities on the team, and I think that helped him a long way. And like you mentioned, that helped him down the road when he goes to the Lakers because the guy just was able to win. And yeah, he had all these Hall of Famers, but what good coach hasn't had good talent on the floor? So, you know, he gained a lot of my respect, like you said. It's just, it opened my eyes a little bit as to what he had to deal with because it wasn't all ice cream and happiness. You know, there was a lot of turmoil going on.
And one of the parts that they actually brought up, or they showed, that I really liked was that situation where Pippen wasn't going to be given the ball in that final draw up of the play to take the final shot. And Phil Jackson, instead of kind of like freaking out, like, why isn't Pippen on the floor right now? He was like, I'm not going to use the words, but he was kind of like, you know, screw it. Puts the guys on the court, throws another guy in, and they win the game. And that just goes to show, like, he knew what he was talking about. We know Pippen at the time was the best player on the court, but he knew that he shouldn't be taking that shot in that situation. And whether Pippen was on the court or not, whether he was contributing to that play or not, Phil Jackson knew what it was going to take to win, and it worked out in his favor. It might have not looked so great if, I think it was Kukoc. I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it. Kukoc misses the shot, then maybe we're saying a different story here. And that's the backlash that coaches take sometimes, right? Coaches drop a play and have a guy make the shot. The guy hits it. Coach looks like a mastermind. He misses it. The coach gets the blame. But in that case, obviously, with Jackson's track record, he made a lot more better decisions than he did bad decisions. So
I think his worst decision was going to the Knicks to begin with. But we'll save that for another topic for another day. But like, the thing about Jackson to me was he never complained about the situation, or at least the clips that we saw. Everything was very basic, and he was willing to roll the dice with what he had. Jordan retires. Does he complain? No. A lot of coaches would have been crying at his feet. Please don't leave me. Please don't leave me. He didn't care. He kept going. He kept doing his thing. He kept doing what he signed up to do. That was to coach what was on the current roster of the Chicago Bulls. That moment with Pippen, if that didn't fall in from Kukoc from that desperate three-pointer, it's a different story, but he was willing to trust himself, trust the offense that he had in place, and that was the guy he wanted taking the shot. And he wasn't going to apologize. He wasn't going to let egos get in the way. That's the kind of coach that he was, and that's why he was so successful. Sometimes it's not the ideal thing to give the ball to your best player in a certain situation. Sometimes you have to rely on other guys, and that's why these Bulls players, they knew their role. They understood what they were called upon to do. And when the time came, they more times than none did that job.
Yeah, and that goes to show a kind of like the type of guy that Phil Jackson was, because he was this really laid back kind of guy. So no matter the situation, he was calm. And they did a lot of meditation, that team. And they knew how to be calm in certain situations. And you want to talk about a team that needed that, it's this team. They always had the spotlight on them. You have Michael Jordan on your team. You're must-watch television every single night. You keep winning championships, you have the target on your back. So everyone's always focused in on you. This is the team that needed that type of meditation, that kind of like calm, cool, collected personality and those types of traits to succeed. And that's all because of Phil Jackson, the type of guy that he was. But also jumping back to the roles and talking about the players and how they knew their roles and knew the right passes to make, the right plays to make, and the right plays that were drawn up by Phil Jackson. It goes to show in certain championships. John Paxson hits that game-winning shot against Phoenix in '93. Steve Kerr hits the game-winning shot in Utah in '97. So these are guys like Paxson was the starting point guard in that first three-peat. Kerr was coming off the bench and needed to hit some big shots, but they weren't looked at to take that final shot. And whether I'm sure Phil Jackson didn't necessarily draw that play up for John Paxson to take the game-winning shot or Steve Kerr to, but the team knew. Like, even though Michael Jordan was the guy to take that final shot, he instilled it in them. Like, listen, if you're not open, you got to bounce the ball out to the open guy. And luckily, in their case, Paxson and Kerr stepped up big. And I'm glad that they focused on that in there, because those are guys that were huge players. Like, John Paxson was a massive part of that first three-peat, and he doesn't always get the credit for it, but he was a really good player. That's why a guy like Steve Kerr wanted to be the next John Paxson. He wasn't looking to be the next John Stockton. He wanted to be the next John Paxson and win some championships.
Yeah, and that's why I love the documentary so much. I think that it gave a more insight as to the Chicago Bulls as a whole, and it showed all the pieces that were essential to the creation of this team and to the success of this team. And as we kind of get off the players and as we're in coaches, we head to the front office. And the guy who masterminded this whole program was Jerry Krause. And let's just get into this guy a little bit. In my opinion, he could have went down as one of the greatest front office executives in the history of basketball. But I feel, and I want to hear your opinion on this, I feel that his ego got in the way of how truly respected he could have been. I feel like he always was looking for more credit and couldn't live under the fact that Jordan was getting so much credit, to the point where it got to him, to the point where we see in the documentary, he basically tells Phil Jackson, You could go 82-0 and win the title. You're not coming back. This team is not coming back.
Yeah, listen, he deserves a lot of credit for putting this team together, right? But he deserves just as much credit for tearing the team apart. Simply said, I mean, I feel like Jordan and Pippen, and he did it to himself because Jordan and Pippen would crack jokes on him throughout the entire documentary, right? The entire few seasons that they were wrapping up there in that final three-peat. They didn't have a lot of respect for the guy. They respected him to an extent, but they didn't like how he approached certain situations. The fact that Scottie Pippen, and this goes back to what we were talking about with the Olympics before, the fact that Scottie Pippen had such an impact and you winning championships and an impact on the league and an impact to Michael Jordan's career, but you're not looking to even pay him and you're looking to sign Kukoc, like an international player, over him. That's why Pippen gained my respect too. And I loved how they kind of bullied him in that the Olympics. Now, with that being said, I never really understood it. I think that, I think the reason Krause did what he did was because he put together this team to win championships, but he wasn't getting the credit that he wanted. It was all, well, it was Phil Jackson, it was Michael Jordan, it was Scottie Pippen, it was Dennis Rodman. So he was like, you know what? When you guys are getting older after this 98 season, I want you guys out the door so I could show people that I could put together a team again. And I love how the documentary ended in the finale where it kind of comes out. And Michael Jordan makes the point where, listen, if you told us to come back on one-year deals to win our 7th championship, we would have done it. So therefore, that team had absolutely no excuse to tear that team apart after winning the championship. When you just won a championship, they all had so much more left in the tank, and you pulled it apart. And I think it's one of the biggest what-ifs in sports history. Like, what if those guys came back? How does that change the landscape of basketball for the future? Because let's say they came back another year, maybe 2 years. They're taking a championship away from Tim Duncan. You're taking a championship away from Kobe and Shaq. Like, those guys all got their chance once Jordan was out the league. So Krause is the reason. He's the reason for this, but he's also the reason why it fell apart.
Now, I want to get into the hatred from Jordan and Pippen, which I understand because it just seemed as if Krause never appreciated what he had. If he appreciated what he had, he would have extended Pippen, gave him the money he deserved. It just seemed like Jordan couldn't stand the guy, couldn't stand anything he was about. One of my favorite movies growing up was Space Jam. And I never made the correlation between Moron Mountain, which is the enemy's territory, and the quote-unquote owner of Moron Mountain, which, if you put them side to side, and Jerry Krause is currently on the screen, I have a Sports Illustrated cover up, you could make the correlation that Jordan designed him in the image and likeness of Jerry Krause. That's the kind of level that he essentially showed hatred for the GM there. And again, like you said, it's a situation where it just didn't seem like he was happy winning. He wanted more credit. And there was too many people in the mix that had that kind of credit that he thought he deserved. And another way to look at this too, wasn't the year Jordan retired a shortened season? Wasn't that the lockout year? So essentially, You're bringing back all these players that you say are quote unquote older and not worth their market value. If they would have signed for a 1-year deal, you have that lockout. They're playing a shortened season to get more time to rest after that long and grueling finals appearance and playoff appearance. You mean to tell me that team couldn't win a 7th?
Not just that, but also the fact that I think what they should have done is at least talk to some of the guys, not just assume that they were all going to go and run for like max contracts. I mean, I think a guy like Pippen, maybe Pippen deserved a bigger contract. Maybe you want to give Jordan's already going to get paid. Maybe you give Pippen a bigger contract. But having Rodman come back on maybe a smaller deal, like to keep winning championships, I don't think these guys would have been opposed to it. And I did notice the correlation or the similarities, I should say, to Krause and Space Jam. I didn't realize that either. But also, thanks to the documentary in itself, because I didn't even know Jerry Krause existed. I had no idea this whole time, like my entire life. I just thought that Michael Jordan and those guys split up because contracts were up. Michael Jordan retired, because he retired a few years before that. Maybe he was getting older. I had no idea that he wanted to come back and things like that. So, like I said, one of the biggest what ifs in basketball history, and the fact that it was a shortened season due to, I believe, the lockout in the '99 season. This team, a few years prior to that, won 72 games. What would they have done in 50 games alone? Like, let alone win a 7th championship. What would their regular season record have been? So it's weird how things end up happening, right? Like, that's a massive what if, and the fact that it was a lockout season, it makes it even bigger what if.
Without a doubt. And for me, Krause could have been one of the most beloved people in Chicago in the Bulls franchise history, but now he's looked upon as the guy that tore down the dynasty. And I think that it's safe to say that most dynasties that we've seen, you can go to the Yankees in the late '90s, you can go all different routes in terms of dynasties. There's always been somebody to dethrone them, and we saw that with the Pistons in the documentary series, how the Bulls had to overcome the Pistons. This might be the only dynasty we ever see that wasn't ended on a court, that wasn't ended by somebody beating them. They went out on top. They didn't get nobody got a chance to dethrone them.
I'm going to respond to that too, but one last thing I wanted to make about Krause. We did notice in the documentary, like, they did say certain things, right? It felt like it went more in a direction towards what Jordan said, what Pippen said, those guys said. The one thing I didn't like, and I know they really had no chance or no opportunity to really do this, but I didn't really like how, because Jerry Krause, obviously, he passed away. I don't know if anyone knew that, but he passed away a few years ago. I don't like how he didn't have a say in that, because they could have just been focusing so much on one part of that, where Jordan, Pippen, and those guys, and we know how Jordan was, they might have done some things that made Jerry Krause kind of want him out the door, whether you're winning championships or not either. We can't sit here and just make Jerry Krause out to be the devil. It's kind of like the Aaron Hernandez documentary. Great documentary, but I'm not really a fan that they put this out when the guy passed away, because he can't defend himself in half those things, whether they're true or false. But the dynasty, I mean, yeah, we may never see anything like that again. Whether they were dethroned or not dethroned, I just think, even if the Warriors had won 3 championships in a row these past few years, it's still just not the same. We're not looking at Klay Thompson, Durant, Curry, Draymond as rock stars. Jordan, Pippen, and Rodman, that 3-year stretch, they were rock stars. They literally were rock stars. And I don't know if it was because it was the 90s and social media was different and people didn't really have the access to see them as much as they did. So people were bombarding the hotel rooms. People were pushing the buses. It was crazy. It was a different world. But at the time, they were rock stars. Michael Jordan, and this was impressive too, because we know how big of a brand LeBron has made, and that's just going to continue to grow because of the player and the type of guy he is. We know the Michael Jordan brand. But the fact that he was able to build that at a time in the 90s where you're not able to really self-promote yourself the way people are today. So the fact that people around the world knew him, they knew him because of what he did on the basketball court. And that stood out to me. That was in the finale. Like, that made me think, well, I was like, man, that is impressive. Because, when the 98 finals happened, I was like a toddler. So I didn't know all this. Like, I'm learning all this as I go. But that just goes to show, like, the documentary just taught, I think, everyone so much. Everyone has their own opinion on it. Everyone has changed their perspectives on certain people, gained respect for others, lost respect for others. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and, and like you said, Krause passed away, I believe, in 2017. And there really wasn't much of an opportunity to talk to him. But if you listen to his press conferences and try to take some of that, he was very awkward in front of a microphone. Not that it was a bad thing. Some people are. Me and you quite aren't, because we've been on for over an hour now. But he deserves a lot of credit. Whether Jordan and Pippen and those guys liked him, he deserved a lot of credit for the run-in. And let's be honest, we don't have this without him. So I think that's something that a lot of people need to take into consideration when they look at this documentary. Now, overall, what were your thoughts on the Last Dance documentary? And did it change your mind on anything, or did anything stand out to you?
Yeah. So like I've said a few times now, I think the documentary was great. It was great. Everything about it was. There was not a moment where I thought about changing the channel. I feel like I'm gonna at some point go back and rewatch it. Just I like doing that sometimes on shows or documentaries that I like because you miss certain things. I don't think it changed my mind on anything. I know that we've had heated debates in the past about who the GOAT is, and I don't think it's changed my mind. I think certain things that Jordan did actually make me respect LeBron for who he is a little bit more, actually. Um, but I'm not going to get into that right now. The way I feel is I think it's Jordan being Jordan and this Bull team being the Bulls team that they are. It doesn't matter what happens in the future. It doesn't matter if LeBron wins 7 championships. At the end of the day, Michael Jordan's Michael Jordan. This Bull team is that Bulls team, and like they'll never be replaced. It's always going to be a part of history. We're looking back at this 22 years later now. So, with that being said, great documentary. I think with the final thing I'll say is I think it's LeBron 1A, Jordan 1B. I think they're right there. I think that's how it's going to continue to be. So yeah, my mind didn't really change too much on that topic. What
The
about you?
documentary was fantastic. I think they did a really nice job taking 10 hours of footage and personal stories, not only from the players on the Bulls, uh, but also people that were impacted. The John Stocktons, the Karl Malones, the Gary Paytons. You name it, the Magic Johnson. Those guys were all involved in this some way, somehow. Uh, what this shows for fans, it's a history lesson in the NBA because these guys set the tone. This was the evolution of a new generation of basketball, and I think that it brought about a new fan base that won't be replaced and will help grow the game for generations to generations. My stance on the whole GOAT conversation is that it solidifies Jordan as the GOAT even more. Um, Not only the fact of what he did on the court, but the legacy that he left. What he did will never be done again. Uh, to be able to just retire from the game and come back and win 3 more championships after you just repeated, that's very difficult in itself. And I understand the whole topic of having a team around him, and Kraus built a nice roster to support him. But at the end of the day, and like I said it earlier, every great team has good players that understand their role, good players that want that desire to win. And yeah, what Jordan did on some occasions wasn't necessarily what you would call normal or right, but he felt, and he shows it in the documentary very emotionally, that what he did was necessary for the Bulls to be successful. And looking back at it, you can't really question him because of the success that they did have. But if you didn't get a chance to watch the documentary, I definitely think you should. I believe it's on Netflix now, is it?
I
So if
believe
you
so. Yeah.
haven't checked that out yet, head over to Netflix, The Last Dance. Especially during this time, I think it was well needed for everybody. I know for myself, every Sunday it was that anxiousness waiting for it. I was excited for it. I was really upset to see it end. And like Kyle, I'll definitely check it out one more time, just to see what I missed out of it. So as we wrap up today's show, final thoughts.
Um, Obviously, great documentary. Highly recommend people tuning in if they haven't yet. And there's actually one last point I wanted to make about that. I'm actually interested in seeing how some of the players in today's NBA, like what they take from it now. Like, is it going to give them a different approach to the game? Because we saw certain things that Michael Jordan did to get to where he was. Like, he would make up situations in his head. Like the one situation with the rookie or whoever it was saying, good game. And he was like, you want to say good game to me? I'm going to drop the same amount of points you did in the first half tomorrow. So there's just certain things. Obviously, we won't know this until, maybe 20 years from now. But I'm interested in seeing how some of these guys do. And a guy like LeBron, who we've mentioned a bunch of times, like there are a lot of people out there. There's ESPN saying that this solidifies Jordan as the GOAT. What's it going to make LeBron now? Like, does that light a fire under him to be like, I need to step up now because I'm going to try to prove that I'm the greatest. But overall, great documentary. If you guys don't know by now, I know how to ramble. Nick's got to just mute my mic sometimes. But Nick,
We
you can
don't
take
want
it
to mute
away.
your mic because we like to hear what you got to say, and that's why we have this beautiful platform. Uh, and again, it might motivate LeBron. It might motivate others to play the game at a harder level. Jordan had to at times when he wasn't being challenged, make up things in his mind to get going. And, and Roy Williams, and we both love Roy. He said, he's like, there's some players that could flip the switch on and off. And he said Jordan never flipped that switch off. So he was just a unique character. And I'm glad that he finally opened up and allowed all of us into his world and his mind set into everything that's going on. As we wrap up the show, I hope everybody enjoyed the graphics on our streaming site. I think we're getting good at this, Kyle, with the graphics for these people.
I think you are. I think you deserve all the credit for that. You're doing a great job. To me, it looks sick. So hopefully people appreciate it like I do.
Listen, this is a team effort, so this is both of us here. I can't take all the credit for it. There's no Jordan without.
You're the Jordan and I'm the Pippen.
I think we make a good team. As we go off tonight, again, follow us on social media. It's listed below. Delahanty Media on Instagram. You found us on Facebook. Give us a like. Join us next Thursday for our next show. And on Twitter at Let's Debate Pod. Again, if you missed it early on in the show, visit our store, Teespring. The link is up there. Just copy that into your browser. You'll get 10% off if you put in the coupon code Let's Debate. Pretty nice gear. And a good update that I forgot to mention earlier in the show. I should have. There are Let's Debate shirts now live on the site. I'm very excited for that. And make sure you stay tuned to our social media over the week. We will be announcing our new website. So everything will be all in one place for you. I'm trying to make life easy for him, Kyle.
So it's the only thing we can do at this point, That's what it's all about, making things easier and convenient for people. But with that being said, we hope you guys enjoyed the show, and we'll see you guys next week.